kind of our operative words this week. So the passages that are chosen also come out of the, some of them come from the externally focused life book on this theme. And we're going to start with Psalm 67. So let's read it responsibly. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine on us.
So that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations.
May the peoples praise you, God. May all the peoples praise you.
May the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you rule the peoples with equity and guide the nations of the earth.
May the peoples praise you, God.
May all the peoples praise you.
The land yields its harvest. God, our God, blesses us.
May God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him.
Okay, this is obviously one that was written for their communal worship because of the plurals that are here. It's not a personal psalm. And the first question, he says, may God be gracious to us. And the first question is, how has God been gracious to you? I got an extra Ben in there. How has God been gracious to you?
Well, good health, secure living, I have no real worries in my life. I don't, live in Ukraine or any of those
Yeah.
places,
Yeah.
and so I'm pretty blessed in that regard.
Good health.
Good health, you're especially appreciative of, right?
Our daily provision and safety, like Kate said, because we've never had to fear where our next meal was coming from, or if it was safe to stay in our home or go out on the street.
Well,
Not
there was one day 2 weeks ago, but I'll.
Don't want that story on tape or.
No, they had a manhunt in our neighborhood a couple weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Forgiveness,
Yeah.
grace, freedom from guilt and shame.
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes I think we take that a little bit for granted. Many people live in fear, and how many of the other religions in this world encourage and embody fear as a way to motivate rather than a response to God's grace and love. And when you've grown up in,
Right. You
you
take it
don't
for
always
granted.
appreciate what you have. Yeah, that lack of fear, I was just listening to on the way in today, an interview with an 81-year-old in one of the liberated towns from this last offensive in Ukraine, and that's kind of what she said. She said, you're worried, you're thankful, that you've been freed, but you're worried how long it's going to last. And she said you just live with that fear now. Are the Russians coming back, and are we going to remain free? And they were talking about her garden, and apparently it had been very pristine before the Russians came, but the Russians were hiding in trees so they could shoot other people who might come in, and they forbade her from going out to do any weeding or cultivating or anything like that. And so it was an absolute mess because they've been, in occupation for, it was about 6 months that the Russians had taken that area. So stuck in your house, 81 years old, to have to go through that kind of thing. You just can't imagine that kind of thing. And I think things like that make us very, very thankful when we see other people experience. Now, the second question is, why do you think God has been gracious to you? What purpose do you think he had in mind?
He is loving and caring for us. I don't know that there's a purpose for it. I think it's just part of what and who he is. It's his nature.
I think he knows what purpose he has for each of us, but we don't always.
We don't always know exactly what the
Right.
purpose is.
I mean, and maybe you've heard that old verse of, you know, we see, like, it's like, we're like a tapestry and we see the nice side.
Not the.
We don't see the underside with all the knots and strings hanging. So he knows what he's got in mind, but we don't always know.
Yeah. We know generally, but we don't know specifically. Why do we know generally? Because of a psalm like this and because of the epistle lesson we have from Ephesians 2. Because God expresses what his purpose is for us. And one of the, you know, we realize that when sometimes people are nice to us, they can be nice to us for the wrong reason. You know, it's like, well, what do you want? You know? Kids are real good at that, right? They're gonna be extra nice when they want something.
Yeah, that, December's a great month, right? Because they're all being good for Christmas.
Yeah, what were we just, oh, that was in the father of the groom speech. I just heard this last time. He said something like this, you know, about his daughter. He said, well, I always knew when she wanted something because it'd be, hey, daddy-o. And those were the key words that told me.
She's up to something.
Yeah, I could always say, okay, what do you want? So it just kind of, those kind of things we think about sometimes when people are gracious to us or nice to us, there's a purpose in mind, and other times it's just because they're being kind. Now God does have a purpose for us. And the first thing we see, the psalm is shaped, at least the beginning, by the Aaronic blessing. You know the Aaronic blessing, it's the Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord shine upon you and be gracious to you, the Lord lift up his, right, or turn his face, or your countenance is your face. And so he uses some of the same words in this first one, but now we get the purpose. For what reason? So that your ways may be known on earth.
So in other words, we act like he does. And
We
we're
act like he
gracious to
does,
others.
and, yeah. So that's, so that your ways may be known on earth because of what they see here in us. And how does he recognize that these blessings extend beyond Israel? Well, just look at the words of the song. Right? The very first one in verse 2, among all nations. And then when he says, may the peoples praise you, may all the peoples praise you, well, you might say, well, is he, because he's worshiping with his fellow Israelites, just talking about the Israelites? Well, the answer is because of parallelism in Hebrew that, no, he means other people as well, because the next verse, the parallel verse, is make all the nations be glad and sing for joy. And you guide the nations of the earth. So he's not just talking about Israel, he's talking about this purpose that he has for Israel to be a revealer of God's loving grace to others in his world. And you can see it in the last verse. Anytime so that is there, I learned early on in English that's a purpose coming up, right? That's a purpose clause when you say so that. So may God bless us still, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. So, so if you, my next thing is one way you can emphasize, just underline all the places where the Lord expresses his purpose for his blessing. You know, so that your ways may be known among the nations, so that all the ends of the earth will fear him. And this image is reflected in a number of other places in the Bible. So let's go to Isaiah 66. Excuse me, the last chapter of the book of Isaiah. And he's talking about what he's going to do. And here we're looking especially at verses 18 to 23, where he has the same kind of theme. Somebody want to read those for us? Oh, I should have my microphone. Turn it on.
And I, because of their actions and their imaginations, am about to come and gather all nations and tongues, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and I will send some of those who survive to the nations, to Tarshish, to the Libyans, and Lydians, famous as archers, to Tubal and Greece, and to the distant islands that have not heard of my fame or seen my glory. They will proclaim my glory among the nations, and they will bring all your brothers from all the nations to my holy mountain in Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord, on horses, in chariots and wagons, and on mules and camels, says the Lord. They will bring them as the Israelites bring their grain offerings to the temple of the Lord in ceremonially clean vessels. And I will select some of them to be the priests and Levites, says the Lord. As the new heavens and new earth that I make will endure before me, declares the Lord, so will your name and descendants endure. From one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord.
Okay, that's far enough. The rest of it is looking at dead bodies, and we don't. That's not a part what we're aiming for here. It's talking about the judgment. But what he does say here is that, again, there are going to be people who are going to go to these nations. Inside of these nations, there are people who are going to follow God's way. There'll be ceremonially clean vessels. Some of them, not just Levites, are going to be priests and Levites. In other words, they're going to be spiritual leaders in what God is doing. And eventually, he says, all mankind will come and bow down before me. So this idea that Israel is for the nations is something that's very prevalent in a lot of places in the book of the prophet Isaiah. It's obviously the theme in the book of Jonah, where Jonah is sent to the Ninevites, would be an example of, God doing just what he's talking about here. So this vision that God would bless them so that they would bless the nations. And if you think about this, this goes way back. One of the first promises, I don't have this passage in here, about the nations goes back to the promise to Abraham. In your seed, all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. It's the promise of a kingdom that's going to be established in the Messianic line. And then the conclusion of this psalm is God will bless us, and all the ends of the earth will fear him. So where do you see some of that kind of language elsewhere in Scripture? Well, if you go to Isaiah chapter 45, somebody read verses 22 to 25 for us.
Turn to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. By myself I have sworn, my mouth has uttered in all integrity a word that will not be revoked. Before me every knee will bow, by me every tongue will swear. They will say of me, in the Lord alone are righteousness and strength. All who have raged against him will come to him and be put to shame. But in the Lord all the descendants of Israel will be found righteous and will exult.
So he says, turn to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth. Romans 14, let's go there. And specifically verses, we could start with verse 9. Say 9 to 12 instead of 10 to 12.
For this very reason Christ died and returned to life, so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. You then, why do you judge your brother? Or why do you look down on your brother? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. It is written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me. Every tongue will confess to God. So so then each of us will give an account of himself to God.
And so you see that a reflection also of that earlier Isaiah passage that every knee will bow. And then Philippians chapter 2, probably the most famous of the passages that have this kind of language in them. Philippians chapter 2. It's at the end of that early Christian, what we believe is one of the earliest Christian hymns in the New Testament. But at the end of it, starting in verse 9, as it speaks about the exaltation of the Messiah.
Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And the difference is that those of us who trust and believe in Jesus will do it willingly, and others will do it unwillingly, or from a position of, oh man. Yeah. Right? And so aligned with these passages, what purpose has God brought his blessing into your life? For whose benefit and for what purpose, according to these passages?
You can tell others.
Yeah, and there's that externally focused. Is it just to bless you and say, oh, you know, like Tom Thumb? What a good boy. Right? Full little plum. Or is it for another purpose? And one of the things that we believe is that Jesus always directs us outside of ourselves. As we heard this last week, you know, he leads by example. He talks about how he himself came to serve, to seek and to save the lost, how he came to serve, not to be served. The major difference, and you see this transition from New to Old Testament, is that the Old Testament was a come-to kind of strategy. And so it was, Israel was supposed to be the example that everybody who saw Israel and saw the way that they lived and they talked would say, boy, these are some people that I want to be a part of, I want to emulate. And that's what we, hear, is that other people would know, as it says, that his ways might be known among the nations. But it was more of, we're going to be an example for everybody else. And in the New Testament era, there's no temple to go to. Instead, the constant focus is go and make disciples. It's a sending rather than a gathering. In the Old Testament, it was more gathering. Okay, let's gather at the Mount Zion. Let's gather in Jerusalem. The gathering was the big thing. In the New Testament, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so there was no opportunity to gather at the temple anymore, and it's never been rebuilt since. The New Testament emphasis is always going into the nations, living in the nations in such a way that God's ways might be known among the people that we live and serve. So if somebody says, what's one of God's purposes for your life? You can say, is to be an example for others in the way that I live, the way that I talk, the way that I behave, so they can know what it looks like to meet Jesus through me. Yeah, Karen.
So was Jesus' time before the temple was destroyed?
Just before.
Because he was always, walking in the temple,
right,
and all that stuff. So
and the same thing in the New Testament, the disciples do. But the temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. There was a rebellion. If you're familiar with the story, Masada, the great fortress of the Jews, as a mountaintop fortress, was kind of the last holdout, and the Romans surrounded it, but they tore, remember Jesus said that, he said in one of his, talking about what was going to happen, he said, not one stone will be left on the other, because it was a complete devastation. The Romans just had it up to here with the Jewish rebellions, and they came in and wiped it out. And the last stand was at Masada, the mountain fortress, and the people they ran out of food, ran out of water, all that kind of stuff. It was brutal, and eventually the Romans destroyed them. And so the temple was destroyed at that time. It's never been rebuilt. The Temple Mount is there, which is the platform on which the temple existed, but there's a mosque over the Dome of the Rock, which is a place where traditionally Abraham sacrificed Isaac. And so the only way to rebuild the temple would be to tear down the mosque, and that wouldn't go well. Yeah. So the temple to this day has not been rebuilt. There are some groups, even some Christian groups, who are advocating that we should get behind building another temple, because they believe the Messianic reign can't happen until that temple is rebuilt. Now, there's nothing about that in the Bible, but that's what they believe. And but again, that would just create World War III. That would really set things up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the temple has been destroyed, and now the impetus is go. And that's where Jesus says, "Go to the nations, baptizing and teaching." You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, the distant islands. With the idea, going back to the prophecy in Isaiah, that on the last day, what's God going to do? He's going to bring people from every tribe and language, nation and people. When you read the book of Revelation, it's always in fours, not always the same four. But those people are going to be gathered as God's people at the wedding feast of the Lamb. And so the book of Revelation really picks up on that theme as well. But one of God's purposes for you and for me, for our family of faith, is so that the ends of the earth will fear him. And I don't think I probably focused on that as much either personally or as a pastor, until a brother pastor, Pastor Peter Kellum, kind of opened my eyes to the ends of the earth stuff, just because of his personal experience, and that's how our last congregation got started in doing stuff in Uganda. And it helped me frame then the belief that both as an individual and as a congregation, we ought to be involved in all four of those spheres. In our Jerusalem, which is the ministry we do here. In our Judea, which is the ministry we do in our region. So you think of some of the LWML things that go on in South Wisconsin that we help to support. In our Samaria, which is people who live in our area but come from a different culture. And actually our school has gone from becoming a Jerusalem to a Samaria kind of ministry, because we have people who are not necessarily a part of our culture in our school, but we have the opportunity to share Jesus with them. It's also, in my life, it was Pastor Kasango Gikabet, the French-speaking African immigrant pastor, F.M. Akani, who's at the House of Correction from Nigeria. Guy Kasango Guy is a Congolese pastor who still preaches in French every week. So two French-speaking immigrants in this greater Milwaukee area. And you realize then that we have people like that here, not just the Hispanic population on the south, not just the African American culture, which is different than what most of us have experienced growing up, but also the other immigrants that are here. And we have an opportunity to touch. That's one of the unique things about living in our day and age, is that God has brought the nations to us. We don't always have to go to the nations. But that we think a little bit more purposefully about that. And then personally, it's about recognizing God has sent me to be a blessing to somebody else. So who can I bless today? We're going to sing, I don't remember if it's this week or next week, the song. It's not in our hymn book, but it's a hymn, Lord, Lay Some Soul Upon My Heart. And it's that idea that as I get up in the morning, I recognize I'm being sent into the world to be a blessing to somebody else, to show somebody else Jesus, to point somebody else to Jesus, whether it's the children, a husband or wife, or that's in my house, my neighbor next door, the clerk at the grocery store, whatever it is, that we have an opportunity to reflect Jesus into their lives. I'm going around with the shut-ins now, introducing the theme, and I always remind them that there are people who come into their room each and every day that they have an opportunity to reflect Jesus into their lives. When you're in the hospital, you've got people who come in and clean, you got nurses who are coming in and out, you got doctors coming in and out, you got people who are bringing you food. You have multiple opportunities to reflect and share with people who are serving you. If you see them as opportunities, if you understand this is one of the purposes why God has given you the blessing of His grace and love and life and peace. And that's true also, and this is the text I'm going to be preaching on, is the Ephesians 2 passage, which many of us, if we grew up in a typical Lutheran congregation, we had to memorize part of it anyway as memory work. We're going to focus especially on verse 10, but let's read it together. I'll step out while you're reading, and we'll pick up there. As for you,
you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with Him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in coming ages He might show us the incomparable riches of His grace, expressed in His kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do.
So he talks about being made alive. So the first question I have here is, when have you felt most fully alive? If you think in your life, when's a time when you really said, boy?
Riding a bike down Mount Haleakala. When you're like, all your senses are exposed to everything in the world, riding your bike through a eucalyptus forest, and you're like, my gosh, I'm in the middle of a potpourri. But then you're watching out for the cattle on the ranch to make sure they don't come running out onto the road because there's no fences.
So you're saying you were in a place that smelled like Bed Bath & Beyond, but you weren't there.
Right, exactly. But it was, you you're just experiencing everything
Right.
in the world around you.
Right.
Plus, you're you're coasting a bike down a mountain, you go for 10 miles and you don't pedal once. It's kind of cool.
Bath and Body Works.
That's right.
Oh, it's not
Bath
bad,
and
not
Body
just
Works.
Bath and Body Works.
We knew what he meant.
Tells you how much I've been there.
Yeah, actually, Bath and Body Works, I can't even go in there, it makes me sneeze. Oops.
I think holding a newborn baby
Mm-hmm.
kind of puts you there. Kind of puts you there, you can just kind of marvel once again at the precious gift of life. Yeah, I've said to Jerry on occasion, when there are just certain times or periods in our life where, God's blessings just seem to be poured out. My heart is full, that's the way I say it. My heart's just full. And
Another one, and this might sound strange, is at the funeral of a family member who's lived a full life.
Mhm.
And the one I think of is my grandmother, because she was really strict with us. It was, you go up to her cottage at the lake and there was a list of chores, all that kind of stuff. But you went to her funeral and you listened to all these people that knew her outside of her family, and she was a completely different person. And it was like, oh, this is cool. She was my family, that's cool. And you just see the blessing that she was to everybody around her. And she was a blessing to us. We loved her.
Right.
But, family's hard. So,
Funny you should say funeral, because what came to my mind immediately was singing for all the saints at Pastor Wangeren's funeral. And that was such an experience. It was really felt,
heartwarming.
yeah,
Mhm.
connected to all the people with whom you were singing.
Singing.
How often is that? That's often when you're singing with someone. But that particular, I can experience that again, just
See
by
it, feel
thinking
it.
about it, yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Feeling most fully alive.
Mhm.
In this passage, Paul is dividing his life and our lives into two periods. How would you describe those two periods?
Before and after.
Yeah, there's a BC, before Christ, in this. I didn't ask this question, but how does he describe Satan here?
The spirit of, where is that?
Kingdom
A
of
ruler.
the air.
Ruler of the kingdom of the air, that was it.
It's all around us.
And the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. It's interesting that in the Bible, the number 3 is often representative of God, and sometimes 3s also come in reference to following the devil. And that's what you've got here when you first followed all the ways of this world. Second, the ruler of the kingdom of the air. Third, the Spirit who's now disobedient. It's just a pneumatic device to remember what's being said and draw some additional emphasis to it. And it's interesting how he says all of us lived among them at one time. And I always puzzle about that, because I always think, well, gee, I don't have a conscious memory when I didn't know Jesus as my Savior, but, he says there was a BC for everyone. And the reality is that all of us have at times gratified the cravings of our sinful nature, following its desires and thoughts rather than
Maybe
looking
it's
to please
before we're
God.
baptized. I mean, I lived for 2 weeks before I was baptized.
Well, I would say that, but if you know, the Bible talks about infant faith, and so I'm pretty strong on that, and in the Old Testament too, before there was baptism. And what Luther said when he was teaching, and I only know this because that was my topic for my master's thesis, says, what Luther says is if the baby believes before baptism or at least in baptism. What does he mean by that? Well, he says God's word has significant power, and the power isn't related to understanding. I mean, after all, Jesus said, be still to the waters. Did they understand in the way that you and I understand? No, but they obeyed. And his point is simply that God's word has that kind of power to bring from somebody from death to life, from non-faith to faith. And when a baby is surrounded by God's word, that child, just like us, has the and you say, well, what kind of baby? Well, if you say, what can a baby understand, then you're putting all of your eggs in the understanding basket in terms of what faith is.
But their parents believe. Is that what you mean?
No,
No, that the baby heard the word.
that the baby heard the word, and the word has power to create faith. And so Jesus can say, as he's quoting the Old Testament, out of the mouths of infants, God has perfected praise.
So then when would this time be that we were?
Well, that's a good question. That's what I'm saying.
Conception.
I'm not sure. Conception. Yeah, we were born in sin. And sometime, God brought us from death to life. And one of the challenges sometimes is that in our particular experience of faith, for most of us probably sitting here, we don't have really a great BC story, you know? Kind of my reflection on that was, there was a fella, Biesenthal, his name, what was his first name? Leroy Biesenthal. He wrote Dialogue Evangelism 2 for the LCMS, which was basically a revision of the Dialogue Evangelism that Kennedy, Presbyterian pastor, had written. And he went to a conference. He relayed this to some Missouri Synod pastors. He went to a conference, and one of the things that you had to do if you're in regular dialogue evangelism, you have to write out a witness. And the witness is supposed to be about what you were like before Christ and what you were like after Christ, you know, and that's a witness you're supposed to share with other people. And the fella was a great kind of a Baptist kind of evangelist, and Leroy said he went up to him and said, Archie, he said, I don't have a BC. You know, I'm a son of a pastor. I was raised in a pastor's home. I don't have any memory of it. And he said what Archie Hart said to him is, well, thank God for that. That's your witness, you know. Don't feel bad because you can't say, well, I was in a gutter someplace, you know, strung out on drugs, and, you know, I saw the light. And he said, your testimony, your witness is just that. That you have known Jesus from the time you had a first memory. And that, he said, why would you want, because he said he was a little jealous of the people that had the great, you know, big stories. He said, why would you be jealous? Would you really want to have been where they were at to experience the love of Jesus that you have known since you were little? You know, so be thankful, and that's the witness you write. You don't have to make up something and as if that there was this traumatic BC kind of experience in your life. But that's your witness. The reality is that all of us know that we're sinners. And that if it were not for Jesus, we'd be dead in sin. So if we're dead in sin, how are we made alive in verses 4 and 5?
Well, his great love and his rich mercy.
Now this is where the words grace and mercy, right? And those are significant words. Mercy is not getting what you deserve.
Right.
It's when you go to the judge and say, Judge, I fall on the mercy of this court. Right? It's not getting what you deserve. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. It's just the opposite of mercy. Grace is giving you a gift that you didn't earn or deserve. And the marvel is that when you and I think about our salvation, it's both because of God's mercy, because he doesn't give us what we deserve, and it's because of his grace, because he gives us what we don't deserve. Some of the other pictures of our natural state in the Bible, when somebody says, well, I came to faith, I say, well, do you believe what the Bible says about your natural state? What does it say about your natural state? You were dead. Can a dead person do anything about his condition? If he could, he wouldn't be dead. Luke 15, we probably don't even have to look that one up. Do you guys know what that one is? Those are the parables. Lost coin, lost sheep, lost son. What are they there? They're lost. Now, how does being lost indicate that we're helpless in our condition?
Well, you can't find your way back. You need someone else to guide you.
You need someone else to guide you. If you could find your way back, you wouldn't be lost, right? So a lost person needs somebody to come find them and bring them home again. They're helpless. If they were not helpless, they'd be able to find their own way home, but they're helpless because they're lost. Let's go to Revelation chapter 3. There's a couple of them in there that are also reflected back in Colossians. And I could have added another one that comes to mind. So Revelation chapter 3, verse 17. This is in the section where he's speaking to the church in Laodicea. And he says, in verse 17,
You say I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked.
There's some language that describes the desperateness of life without Christ, without his love and grace. So blind, can a blind person do anything about his condition? Obviously, he can't see to do anything about his condition, right? So thinking about that blindness, and he uses wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked is an interesting thing. But you see, that would be bringing up all of the images from the Old Testament about the robes of righteousness that God dresses us in. And we sing about the hymn, Jesus, thy blood and righteousness, my beauty are my glorious vestments, flaming worlds with these arrayed, with joy I shall lift up my head. There's Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. There's wretch. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. So again, picking up on those images that are in this particular passage describing the necessity of God to do his work with us.
There's an interesting note on that verse 18. It says, it refers to the three items which Laodicea took great pride: financial wealth, an extensive textile industry, and famous eye salve. Its wealth is attested to the rebuilding of the city without any assistance from Rome after an earthquake destroyed it in AD 60. The woolen cloth from its textile industry was either brightly dyed or woven from black wool, but the people need to be dressed in white.
Yeah, one of the neat things, if you ever do a really good, I learned a lot. I did a series on the 7 churches of the book of Revelation, and that's what you'll find is that the words that are used to each of the churches is very particular, pointing to something in that particular village or city. Yeah, when he speaks to these cities, he's speaking in a language they would understand because he uses images from what that city. And so it's just a neat thing to walk through those in one by one. So maybe we can do that in future Bible studies.
And those were real cities?
Oh, yeah,
Or
yeah.
those were just in the,
No, they were real cities in Asia Minor. I've got a book in my library called In the Shadow of the Temple, and it's just kind of a cool one because it came out of I got it from a Jewish, it wasn't Jews for Jesus. I don't remember which group I first got connected to it, but it just intrigued me, and so I bought it and read it, and it was interesting because you can take a map of where all the major Jewish synagogues were in the first century, overlay it with a map of where all the major Christian congregations started, and guess what?
They line up.
Pretty much lines up. And these cities that he mentions are on a major, it's kind of a circle, but on a major trade route that goes through what Asia Minor, which is today Turkey. So in Turkey you would find these different cities. And as I said, when they all had Jewish synagogues in them. So when you think about Paul's missionary strategy, what did he do?
He went to the synagogue first.
Went to the synagogue first, and very often got invited to preach because he was a renowned rabbi, one who sat at the feet of Gamaliel, one of the greatest rabbis in all of Israel, right about the time of Jesus. And so he had an opportunity to start there. He would preach there until they kicked him out. But by then he generally had enough people who were convinced that Jesus was the Christ based on his preaching from the Old Testament that he would start a church.
Cool.
And that's where the house church movement started because they didn't have buildings, so they would meet in homes. But it's just an intriguing, when you see how that New Testament mission was carried out by going to these cities. And they were all, I think they were all Roman cities, as I recall. A lot of them built by Rome, and that's why that note had a comment, this one was built without assistance, which means they had more wealth than a lot of the other cities had.
Kind of tying in with that, and the point of each church had their own situation that Paul was addressing. I got a note. This is on how can believers be poor and rich at the same time, but the point is Christ guarantees economically poor believers like those at Smyrna their spiritual wealth. But he says that those who are smug in their material prosperity, like the Laodiceans, are spiritually impoverished.
Right.
So he goes to each church for the need that they have.
But speaks in the context of, again, what the individuals
What
were.
their situation is.
Which makes sense.
Okay, Colossians 1:21 is the last one I have here in terms of thinking about the helplessness of our condition. Somebody there want to read it? I didn't get there yet.
Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior.
So as good Lutherans, what does it say in the Catechism? We were by our very nature. 3 words. Blind, dead, and enemies of God. And here's where the enemies of God. And the point with the enemies is that the reason why you're helpless is because you don't want to be helped. If I'm your enemy, I'm not trying to be your friend. You know? And so God's got to get a hold of us, which he does by his grace, and makes us alive. Remember, that's resurrection language, right? The dead person has been made alive. Well, who made him alive? Somebody else did. And so that's the image of coming to faith. It's going from death to life. And the question then is, what in this passage is the relationship between God's grace and your good works? I just would ask you this. When you were taught to memorize this, as I was taught to memorize this, what words did you memorize? Do you recall?
Yeah,
It is
that's
by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it's a gift of
all
The
the
no one
way
can
through
boast.
10, 9, 10.
What I found is that most
God. We didn't
often,
learn 10.
most people didn't learn 10,
Oh, we did.
right? And 10 is the point of this week. That we weren't only saved from something, we were saved
4,
for something. And what is it we've been saved for?
to do good works.
To do good works that God prepared in advance for us to do. And so the question that I have for you here is, what's the relationship again between God's grace and your good works?
Do good works because of grace.
You do good works because of grace, not in order to get grace. Good works are a response to a healthy saving faith. They're not what gets you into a healthy saving faith. And this is a radically different way of looking at theology, and it separates a number of people, but this is the core of the gospel. It is, the real reason why the Lutheran Church started is with its break with Rome, is because Rome said good works are a part of what make you right with God. And Luther said no. Good works are a result of. Okay, so at the time of the Reformation, there was a debate about this sentence: "Good works are necessary." Oops, gotta write it off. Are necessary. I'm spelling something wrong, isn't it?
That's right. That's, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. For salvation. I didn't start over far
You gotta talk to Ziggy.
enough. Okay.
Plan ahead.
There was a big debate, and here's the way the Lutherans resolved that. The Catholics said good works are necessary for salvation, and what the Lutherans said is we're comfortable with that sentence up to there. They're necessary because they flow from faith. A good tree produces good fruit. By their works, you will know them. You know, the thing the Bible says is, if you are saved, if you have been saved by grace, then you are naturally going to do good works. And some people will say, well, what about the thief on the cross? Well, what about the thief on the cross? What good work did he do?
He witnessed to
Told
the
the
guy.
guy.
He witnessed to the guy next to him, right? Yes, he did. And he witnessed to anybody else who heard him say what he said when he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That was a testimony, a witness, which is a good work.
He knows where his BC was.
He knew where it was, for sure. You know, and I think one of the challenges that we have is that in the Lutheran Church, and my experience as a pastor, is that we focus so much on being saved by grace that we don't get to the what are you saved for? And I think that's a challenge for us as we go out into the world. I remember one theologian describing it this way. In terms of denominational differences, he said, if you think about the Trinity, he said what happens is some denominations, this would especially be the Calvinists, really emphasize the Father. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're in a Calvinist church, you're going to talk a lot about the sovereignty of God. What does that mean? God is king. He's in control. You take it to its logical conclusion, you get the double predestination of Orthodox Presbyterians. God sits in heaven and decides who's going to go to heaven, who's going to go to hell. Right? Then you've got other church bodies that are like this. The focus is on the Holy Spirit. You speak in tongues, you do miracles and all of that kind of stuff, right? And what's the problem with that? Well, the Spirit says, or the Bible says, that the Spirit came to testify about Jesus, not about himself. You know, it's not about me when it comes to the Holy Spirit. And then he said, Lutherans tend to be more like that. We focus so much on the grace of Jesus. And he said the hardest thing sometimes in Christian theology is to keep all three of them balanced between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And this is the case where we don't talk a lot about sanctification in our circles. In fact, I know some theologians in our circles would say you should never preach sanctification, which means what? Well, you don't tell people how to live out their life as Christians, because they'll just know.
Yeah.
You know? They'll just know. Just preach the gospel, and they'll know. So why does this preacher disagree with that? Because God, I think, tells us more than just the gospel. Think of the commandments. What are they? I like to say they're God's love language. He says what? Put me first. That's how I know that you love me as your God. Respect my name and use it appropriately. Proclaim it appropriately. Bear my name in the way you live appropriately. That shows me that you love me. Spend some time with me. That's remember the Sabbath day. Spend time in my word. Make sure you're resting in me, in my word. Because somebody you love, you want to spend time with. You know? Fourth commandment is honor those. So God says, I've given you people in your life to respect and to honor. And you owe them that honor. And when you paid that honor and respect to them, then you're respecting and honoring me, because I'm the one who put them in some of those positions. So, fifth commandment, respect life. Big debate this, election is going to be about the abortion issue. And what I find missing is a real discussion about, which nobody's answered yet, where does life begin? But you don't hear that. You hear about rights and all of that kind of stuff. Even on the pro-life sometimes, you don't hear a lot about, well, life begins at conception. And every life needs to be guarded and protected. Do you respect life? Do you respect the gift of marriage? And that's the sixth commandment. I know with my confirmands, I've always said to them, the only way you can wrap up a gift that you give your bride or groom on your wedding night is if you start wrapping it up now, and that is to not have relations with anybody else except for them. You know, and you can't wait till you're 25 to start wrapping that gift up. Right? You got to start now. That's the way it impacts you. And then how do you respect your mom and dad's relationship? You know, when I'm dealing with young parents, I say, well, one of the toughest times to go through as a set of parents is teenage years. Why? Because kids are sinful, selfish human beings who want to get what they want, when they want. They know who to ask. They know when to ask. Daddy-o. Right? But that's part of being a child of a marriage is to try to help love and support your parents in that role, and respecting property, which doesn't only mean not taking from other people, but being content with what you have and managing what you have well. not tearing down somebody else. When you destroy somebody else's reputation, you're destroying one of God's children's reputation. And my favorite example with that is, my parents can talk to me any way they want, but if somebody else talks to me in a way that they think is inappropriate, you better believe they're going to get upset. When we destroy one of God's children with our tongues, how does he feel? And then coveting, obviously, the opposite of coveting is being content with the blessings that God has given us. And God doesn't just leave us and say, well, just go try to figure out what I want. And it's not just here, but it's, of course, throughout Scripture. It's always interesting in the epistles that he starts with doctrine always first. And then they get to the application. Now, here's how you should live. And what Paul is doing right here is he's moving from the doctrine, you're saved by grace for the works God has committed you to do. And so you and I can pick up then from there what God wants us to do, his purpose for us. And that's about what we got time for today. Anybody got any questions about what we covered today? Further thoughts, reflections. Now, for you to figure out, your homework is to figure out what God works you believe God has saved you for. Because that's where the rubber hits the road. And to pay attention to those places, opportunities where God gives you to love or serve somebody in his name. Let's close with a word of prayer. Lord God, Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you that you have saved us by grace through faith in your Son's work on our behalf, that he fully and freely paid for all of our sins. And so we are privileged to walk around freed from guilt and shame, but we've also been freed for loving and serving those people you placed around us in our lives. We ask that you would open our eyes to see those opportunities, open our hearts to seize them, open our hands, our feet, our mouths to be used to be a blessing where you have called us to be a blessing in our Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Bless us as we go out this day. Open our eyes to see the opportunities we have this day. Lay some soul upon our heart this day to love and serve in your name. In Jesus, amen. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too. I take it we're not meeting? Everybody except I was gonna maybe just, throw some things at me? Yeah. Okay.